gonna do.
What is this?
Just the audio.
Okay. I better clip that because I'm not sure exactly where I'll be. So there are folks in Hot Springs who need me to tell you hello. And 3 or 4 younger teenage girls who right now are mourning the fact that they didn't get to come here with me. I was afraid about the time I got to Kansas City, they would just pop up in the back seat and say, "Here I am. Oh no, I don't really know what to do with you." But we surely do appreciate our time here during the summer. And I appreciate the invitation to come back this week. It's always a pleasure to be here. This is Eagleville reminds me a lot of my hometown that I grew up in Alabama, except you guys have rolling hills and they're generally green. Ours were generally brown because, you know, it's 153 degrees in December there. So I surely do appreciate that invitation. You know what I like to watch, and I think it has gone off of the air now. It used to come on public access television. It was a show called Antique Roadshow. You remember seeing that? So somebody would bring something that they had from their house that they thought was of value or something that was valuable to them, and they'd bring it to these experts, and they would look it over and turn it upside down looking for numbers or names on this thing, and then they would look at its uniqueness. And my favorite was when they would come up and they say, "This ain't worth $5." It used to tickle me to death for people to be disappointed. I don't know why that was, but value was placed on those things by what they had, by what their numbers were. And there were people who come up and they would bring something that said, I don't really know what this is. My grandmother had it. And then they would say, okay, well, that's worth $5 billion. And you think, how in the world is that worth this and this worth nothing when the first one looks so good and the second one looks so bad? Well, it's about the numbers. It's about who all writes those things. And it's about what value is assigned by the assessor. If I had a bowl and I wanted to sell it to you for, I told you it was from the Ming Dynasty in China, and I wanted to sell it to you for $1 million, would you buy it? Somebody shake your head yes, because I'll sell you one right now. Value really is about how much we place upon it, about how much we will pay for something, about how much we think it's valuable. Isaiah 53 is where we're going to spend most of our time. We live in a society that does not see the value in itself, and individually we don't see the value in ourselves. And brethren, let me tell you something. That's a problem. When you don't see the value in yourself, you can't see the value in others, that's a problem. It was Isaiah who would write in Isaiah 53 about this one who would be coming to redeem mankind. It would be Isaiah who wrote by inspiration these words about what would happen to the one who was coming. As it would be foolish of us to think that Isaiah wrote these by inspiration and God would say to him, "Isaiah, now I want you to write this, but I don't want you to tell Jesus about it." That's foolishness. He would begin in chapter 52, and I hate the chapter break here. I think it should have started about 52, about verse 13 or so, if you want to get all of it. That's where we're going to start. "Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. As many were astonished at thee, his visage was so marred, more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. So shall he sprinkle many nations. The kings shall shut their mouths at him. For that which had not been told them they shall see, and that which they had not heard they shall consider. Who shall believe our report? And in whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, as a root on dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. He's despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. And he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, and yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb, so opened he not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. Who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. He made his grave with the wicked and the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was there any deceit found in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief, and when thou shalt make his soul an offering and prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand, and he shall see the travail of his soul and be satisfied, and by his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and bare the sins of many, and made intercession for the transgressor. If you can place yourself in Isaiah 53, you can begin to see your value, or at least your value as God would see it. As we look at Isaiah 53, we want to first look at the servant himself, the one who's going to be sacrificed, and then we'll find ourselves in here. And you can see all these things being fulfilled in Matthew chapter 24, 25, 26. You can see it in Mark chapter 14 and 15. You can see it in Luke chapter 22, 3, 4. And you can see it in John chapter 18, 19, 20. Here you have a man who was sent to redeem, sent to buy back, sent to purchase one back to God. Which would let me know then that there, at some point in time, they were already there. Well, what changed? Well, what changed we find in Genesis chapter 3, verse number 1 through about verse number 15. What changed was the temptation. What changed was the reaction to that temptation. Now, I don't know if this was the first temptation of Adam and Eve. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I know that this was not the first sin committed. Right? 2 Peter chapter 2, or 1 Peter chapter 2 would tell us, if God spared not the angels which sinned again. This is the first sin that happens in mankind. And he says, what are you doing? And Adam says, the lady you gave me made me sin. Gentlemen, here's what I learned in 22 years of marriage. Are you ready? That's not going to work. That's not going to work. One, y'all going to have discussion about that later. If you throw her under the bus, she's going to be highly upset. And two, that's not going to work with God, who was supposed to make those decisions, who was supposed to be leading that family, the one who did not, the one who was given that fruit and just ate with them. And so from that point in time in Genesis 3 and verse number 15, it was necessary that a Savior be sent to buy man back to God, to restore a relationship that was already there and should have been there from the beginning. This was the same relationship that God would call good and very good in Genesis chapter 2. He saw the creation of everything that he had. He said, this is very good. If you really look in Genesis chapter 2, there's only one point in time where God says something is not good. In Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18, he says, it's not good the man should be alone. So everything that he creates is good, and we find out that man messes those things up. It is from Genesis chapter 3 where a prophecy is made about a coming Christ. And if you fast forward to Genesis chapter number 12, you see 3 promises made to Abraham. The entirety of the Bible that you hold in your lap hinges on the promise of Genesis 3, or the prophecy of Genesis 3 and the promise of Genesis 12. Everything in that book can be pointed back to those 2 verses. Every single thing. And so if those things don't happen, we never make it to Isaiah 53. Here's a servant in verse number 14 who's going to be beaten to a point to where he's unrecognizable as a human. It doesn't really have that kind of impact in the King James Version. Anybody this week use the word visage? Yeah, me either. He's going to be beaten to a point where he cannot be recognized as a person. And so in John chapter 19, where John would write, they took Jesus and scourged him, we got a whole lot of information that's found in those few words in that one verse. You know, when he comes back to Pilate after that beating, Pilate's very upset with the people who do it. They said, you just about killed this guy. What are you doing? If you've ever seen the movie, The Passion of the Christ, directed by Mel Gibson, there's a lot of inaccuracies in it, but there's also a lot of eye-opening things in it, especially as they begin the process of scourging him and beating him. Unfortunately, because of the rating systems in the United States, you can't go far enough to accurately depict what happened. A terrible beating. You know, we often say this person was beaten half to death. If that would be the case, then at this point, Jesus would have been beaten about 9/10 of the way to death. Rome was really good at that. Really good at pushing the human body and just backing them up just a click so that you stuck around. What a terrible thing to happen to someone who had no sin. Isaiah 53 would say there's no deceit found in his mouth, no sin whatsoever. He's going to grow up just like anybody else, 53 verse 2. He's going to be a root out of a dry ground. My mother-in-law had a large Bradford pear out in her front yard. You know, y'all have Bradford pears? Have y'all found any way to keep them from breaking? Well, they just break all apart. Strong wind comes through, they'll just break off. And we actually had a tornado come through, and it broke it in the middle of the trunk. And so we cut the rest of it down and sort of disposed of it. And now she has another Bradford pear in the same place that one was, but it has about 48 little trunks on it. Here's your idea. It'll grow from nothing. That Bradford pear should have never grown. That Bradford pear should have never gotten where it was, and yet here it grows out of seemingly nothing, and life comes, and he's not going to have any form or comeliness. You know what that means? That's a great King James Version word or phrase there. You ready? Jesus is not going to be Brad Pitt or Arnold Schwarzenegger or someone who is very attractive in your mind and very built up in your mind. He's not going to be something where people will come and be drawn to him just because of who he is. They're going to be drawn to him because of some message. He has no beauty. He's despised and rejected. He's a man of sorrows. He lives his life as the creator of the world in a created body. Dwell on that for a moment. He's going to be the one who is fully in charge and fully regulates what goes on in the entire universe and scope of eternity. And then according to John chapter 1 and verse number 14, he's going to come down here. He's going to put on a coat of flesh. He's going to move from reigning over everything to living in a slum. I don't think I'm going to do that. I have never been mistaken with being Jesus. I don't think I have the ability to do that. I don't think even for the mass of humanity, which in the middle of November will be 8 billion people on this earth, I don't think I give it up. Yet he does. And while you're thinking about that, try to wrap your mind around this idea. God is coming to earth to die. Let me ask you a question. Can God die? It's a trick question. Matthew says no, and it'd be right. He's eternal, right? Until he puts on a body of flesh. Then the only purpose that he has when he comes here is to die. That's why he puts that on. That's why he comes here. He's despised. He's rejected. He bears our griefs and our sorrow. He's smitten, stricken of God. He's afflicted. Not from just the prospect of the point of things that happened to him before the crucifixion. You look at his entire life. He goes from an eternal being to one who is tired. Can you imagine that? He gets tired. What does that feel like? How many of you are hungry right now? Don't lie. Me too, Emma. And he gets hungry. But he's never been hungry. He's never had to worry about being hungry. And he gets thirsty. You ever been real thirsty? Mm-hmm. How does he deal with those things? How does he put on that cloak of flesh and deal with the things that you and I just take for granted every day? Well, I'm hungry. I guess I better go eat something. I wonder if he thought the first time, what is that? What am I doing with this? We find himself working himself to a frazzle where he will find himself going off into a mountain so that the angels can minister to him, so that he can speak to God. What is that about? That's dealing with stress. How many of you have a stressful job? Emily says she does not have a stressful job. She loves her job. You wouldn't believe working with youngins make you stressed out, would you? Here he goes, and he finds a mental break. He finds an emotional break for himself. Why? Because people have to do that. He has to refuel himself physically, has to refuel himself mentally and emotionally, and he's learning what it's like to be a person. He's learning what it's like to be the bridge, is what he's learning. Jesus the Christ, the bridge between man and God. So on that final day, when you stand up and you look at God in his face and say, but you don't understand what it's like to. Now remember, as he's standing right here, he says, I do. Upon Jesus, verse number 6 here, there's an interesting phrase that can be misconstrued at times. The Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. As if to say, Jesus the Christ was guilty of all sin when he was on that cross. And I think the King James Version here does a disservice as they don't translate it enough. It would be more accurate to say the Lord hath laid upon him the charge of guiltiness for the iniquity of everyone around him. Jesus the Christ had no sin and continued to have no sin while he was on that cross. Brethren, let me understand this statement very well, please. If the sin of mankind is laid upon him to where he is responsible for it while he's on that cross, when he dies, he hasn't done anything. He hasn't changed anything. The wages of sin is death. If that sin is laid upon him, then all he's done is paid the wages. But not this one. This one is charged with those iniquities, although he never did those. He dies for those iniquities and for those future iniquities, although he's never been a part of those. He was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. An interesting idea. All right, younger ones. Sometimes living in this world is a tough thing to do, isn't it? It's a hard thing to go through. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she's had some pretty hard times this year. She's working through those. She's doing much better, but she's had a pretty hard year. Now, Jesus doesn't understand that, does he? Except he was 15. He lived through the time in which your hormones are raging. He lived through the time in which your chemical balance in your body may not be exactly right. All tempted in all points, like as we are. In all points, he was a child. He was a teenager. He was a 20-year-old man. He lived to be a 33-year-old man. He understands as he was tempted like as we are. He was oppressed. He was afflicted. For what reason? Well, when you look at him in his life, he's oppressed and afflicted because he comes to an earth and tells a group of people who are supposed to be leading people toward God that you ain't doing this right. By the way, you want to get somebody worked up real quick? Tell them they ain't doing it right. About what? About anything. Caleb, you ain't digging that hole right. What I know? I'm just a preacher. I don't know. I can tell you that. By the way, you want to get preachers worked up? Tell them they ain't doing it right. I've been doing this 19 years, man. I'm doing it all right, I think, so far. People don't want to hear that what they're doing is not right. Why do you do what you do? Because you think it's right? Yeah. What if someone comes to you and shows you that it's not right? Will you change? The church itself has shown itself to be a people who will change if shown the right way in general. What about the world? We show the world at times what they're doing according to God's law is not right, and at some point in time they want to fight you. So I was living in a place called Lineville, Alabama, and it is about this far from Georgia. That far. And this man came to my office one day and he said, "You told my fiance we can't get married." I said, "Who are you?" And he introduced himself. I said, "Oh, yeah. I did. And I said, "Well, I didn't really." And then I showed him what the Bible said. They can't get married because this would have been her third marriage. And neither one of those men had passed away. And apparently, she liked new cars. You know what I'm saying? She liked the smell, the new car smell. When that new car smell on the marriage wore off, she was ready to get her a new one. I like new cars too. Not in marriage, but just new car smell. And so she had done that a couple of times. Matter of fact, the two guys she had been married to still lived in the same little town that we lived in. And he would have been his fifth or sixth. Now you put that together, that's 9. 8 or 9. And none of them had any kind of right to marry even the second one, much less the first one. I told them what they were doing was not right according to God, and he literally wanted to fight me in my office. I said, "I'm not going to fight you about this. That's what it says. I mean, you don't have to do it. This is what it says. This is what you're going to be judged by. You don't have to do it. You haven't done it yet. Why would you start now?" People don't like to be told what they're doing is wrong. I have a 15-year-old, 19-year-old. They don't like to be told what they're doing is wrong. Imagine that. So my 19-year-old, the oldest, plays college softball, and her mother was a college All-American. And she told her last week, she said, you're dipping your shoulder. I was in the band. I don't know what they're talking about. Apparently, as she's going through the slap, that back shoulder's coming down and it's popping that ball up instead of coming over to it and hitting it into the ground. Apparently, that's something. Bad angles are key, apparently. And it was World War III. I'm not doing that. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Roll the tape. Yes. This is when I know Miss Brandy's fixing to win. And this is the point at which guys just sit back, because here it comes. And you would see her just as clear as day as she's coming through that box. Start dipping that back shoulder. And Miss Brandy just stopped it. You see that right there? Yes, ma'am. I mean, we just paused it. And it's been paused for 5 minutes. Would you please unpause that? Nope. Do you see what you're doing? Yes, ma'am. She was so convinced that she was not. So convinced that what she was doing was that proper technique that she could not hear any kind of correction. These Pharisees, scribes, zealots, Sadducees are so convinced that what they are doing in Jesus' day is the right thing. They cannot, they will not, they won't even entertain the idea of change. And when we get to that point, we're hopeless. We're hopeless. It's taken from prison into judgment. He's going to be taken to prison and to judgment several times that night. 3 times, as a matter of fact. Once again, the transgression of my people are upon him. What time do we stop this thing? There's no way. There's no way. So we find Jesus the Christ throughout the chapter of Isaiah 53, time and time and time and time again. But I want you to see you for a moment. Are you ready? Notice how many times these personal pronouns are used. Let's read through it once again a little bit, and we'll see if we can point those out. First of all, who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? Who's going to do that? You? Me? Notice this, verse number 2. And when we shall see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. He's despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, and yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have grown astray. We have turned every one to his own way. The Lord hath laid upon him the iniquity of us all. Look at verse number 10. He was taken, or verse 8, taken from prison and judgment. Who hath declared his generation? For the transgression of my people he was stricken. You see yourself? You want to know why he went through that? You want to know why he had to go through that? Because of me. Because there has to be a price. There has to be a value set by God that said this is going to be the price in order to buy these people back. Interestingly, if I was the only one, if you were the only one, he still would have done it. He still would have had to go through that process in order to buy me back. Why is Jesus on that cross? Because of me. We generally look at that and say, Jesus died because of us. And when I say us, I can say y'all in the proper way, right? So I don't just point fingers, but I'm always thinking about y'all. Y'all should have acted better. And Jesus went, no. Take us out of it. Jesus the Christ, because of my value to God, died for me. And me alone. And here's why I say me and me alone. I'll tell you something about Eric Richardson. I like him. He's a good dude. But I can't make one decision for him in his life, and I can't make him be faithful, and I can't make him follow after what God says. Let me tell you something about Miss Brandy Hayes. I've known her for 38 years of the 46 years I've been alive. I love her. Been married 22 years to that same woman. And I can't make her do a thing. Y'all feel me? Y'all know, you gentlemen know where I'm coming from? Yeah, you ladies know where I'm coming from? You can't make them do a thing, can you? I can't make them obey God. I can't make them stay faithful. The only person I can make do that is standing in my shoes. And to understand my value, I have to understand the price that was paid for me. That the sinless Son of God was taken and nailed to a cross for me. Look down at verse number 12. Or 11. For years, I've had problems with verse number 11. And it's because I'd been reading it wrong. He shall see the travail of his soul and be satisfied. 1, travail. We don't use that word very often, do we? How many of you directly or indirectly know what labor pains are? Some of you who are ladies who have children directly, some of you men who had a front row seat like myself indirectly, we know what those are, don't we? That's the word. The word that is translated travail is arduous labor pains. So a boy can't do that, right? His plumbing ain't right. True or false? True. So we're not necessarily dealing with the idea of labor pains, but we're dealing with the idea of agonizing pain. Who is the he and who is the his? Since boys can't do that, who is the he? Who is the his? He, God. Capitalized, even in the original, is capitalized and is a point toward God himself. God shall see the travail of the soul of this servant. God will see the intense pain of this one who's going to be sacrificed. Have you found out who he is yet? God is going to watch what happens to his son. You wouldn't believe how many kids in youth groups die in car accidents. Generally not of anything that they're doing wrong. You can have bad conditions and hydroplane. You can have sharing the road with people who are intoxicated. And then sometimes accidents and unfortunate accidents like that happen. And such was the case of one of those who was at 70 West. And his parents still attend there. And he went to camp with us. And I was not in charge of the youth program when he was killed. But I did know him very well. There was an interesting conversation that was being had by his father as he was talking to me about kind of the process that they went through to you don't get past those things, but you kind of learn to live with them. And as he's speaking about the years it took them to learn to live with that, he said at one point his wife said, "Where was God when Caleb died?" And Nathan replied, "It's the same place he was when his son died." God's watching this whole process. God is seeing it all. You can't stop it, or else he loses us, which really doesn't seem like a great loss. He can't ease it because it's the price. He can only watch it. God shall see the intense pain of the soul of this sacrifice. Now, here's what I had problems with. And be satisfied. Apparently, I don't use the word satisfied correctly. Imagine that. I don't use a lot of words from Alabama correctly, but this is one I don't use correctly. I think of satisfied as the feeling I have on Friday night after we come back from the Chinese joint. That's, where you go like this. Woo! That word is satiated, not satisfied. There's a difference in those words. I think of satisfaction, and I think of God looking down and going, that's exactly what I wanted. And I thought that for years, and that's not the case. God doesn't look at the sacrifice of Jesus and go, that's about right. Let me ask you a question, mothers and fathers. Suppose you had to watch the torture and death of your child. Could you look at that and go, yeah, that's all right? Neither does God. God sees the travail of this, the extinguishing anguish of this servant's sacrifice, and his wrath towards sin is satisfied. The debt's paid. The difference is made right there. It's not the fact that somebody died for some sin somewhere. It's that somebody with no sin died for the sin of every person. Why? Because of your value. Because you are worth it. God gave his son because you are worth it. Now, if you don't know that, if you don't understand that, if you don't live by that, I don't know how to help you. I need you to see you the way God sees you. You're valuable. So valuable, he's willing to give his son. So valuable, he's willing to send the second person of the Godhead to become a person, to die, so that God can restore a relationship with you. We hid our faces from him, and we esteemed him not. Even though that sacrifice was made, even though that offering was made for us, we still, even in Isaiah's day and even in our day, we still don't understand the value we possess before God. Now, I want to close with this statement because we're already over time. And I want you to chew on this and think about this throughout this week. Are you ready? Here's your statement. If you don't understand the value that you have, how will you ever make any change? If you don't understand the value and the resources given for you, how will you ever change? We're going to spend this week talking about the gospel and the change that would happen and hopefully will happen, and what needs to happen with mankind in general and us in general. But none of that is really going to matter until you begin to fully digest this idea of your value. Now, we could have gone to 100 different chapters, but I like Isaiah 53. From Genesis chapter 1 all the way through Revelation chapter 22, your value drips off of every page. When Jesus Christ is spoken of, your value is spoken of. When the church is spoken of, the value of man is spoken of. When God speaks of heaven, he speaks about your value. When he speaks about hell, he speaks about your value. Do you value yourself the same way he does? All right, let's take a break.